Good morning, afternoon, or evening, Sip&Talkers, no matter what time zone you are tuning in from today. Welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe.
I'm Sunny.
I am just so incredibly pumped for our chat today. I literally stayed up until maybe 2 or 3 in the morning finishing a book that just came out in late 2025.
Oh, wow. A late-night reading session. It must be a heavy one.
Oh, it is. It is called The Tech Tide by Eduardo Giglio. And honestly, it completely rewired how I look at the news right now. He basically takes the current pain points of the United States and just lays them out on an operating table.
Right. He really dissects the mechanics of it.
Exactly. He dissects it layer by layer, and he presents this honestly chilling argument. He says that if you see a government constantly deploying the military domestically, it is absolutely not a flex of national strength.
Yeah, people usually misinterpret that as a show of power.
Right. But Giglio says it actually means the nation's innovation immune system has completely collapsed. So today, we're going to critically examine this whole idea of, well, biological decline in a superpower.
It is a fascinating framework, really.
It is. We're going to check if innovation is actually failing America, look at how the rest of the world is reacting, and really ask the ultimate question, is tech really the only thing keeping a nation alive?
I love that we are tackling this because we usually think of a nation-state as this cold, bureaucratic entity, right? Governed by laws, borders, institutions.
Yeah, it's just a machine.
Exactly. But Giglio treats this state as a biological organism. In political science, we actually call this institutional resilience. The core idea is that when a system can no longer use innovation or, effective resource allocation to digest its internal friction,
it has to default to something else.
Right. It defaults to the most primitive, the most expensive, and honestly the most destructive tool available, which is physical force.
That makes so much sense. And we aren't just going to accept this theory at face value today. We really need to stress test it.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the most visible, visceral symptom of this alleged disease.
Troops on the streets.
When I read that aiming defense mechanisms inward is a sign of extreme systemic stress, my brain immediately went to autoimmune diseases.
That is a very apt comparison.
Right. Is that what we are looking at here? An organism literally attacking its own healthy cells.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about it like a major Silicon Valley tech company.
Okay. I like where this is going.
If that company suddenly stops launching groundbreaking products, right?
Yeah.
They stop investing in R&D, and instead they take all their capital and just hire an army of armed security guards to constantly monitor their own employees.
Yeah, you know exactly what's happening.
That company is going bankrupt.
It is a highly accurate analogy, and it perfectly mirrors the historical trajectory of collapsing empires. If you look at, say, the late Roman Empire or the late Qing dynasty in China, you see this striking parallel.
Oh, really? So it has happened before?
Oh, absolutely. When the central government lost the capacity to bridge massive economic divides or overcome technological stagnation, domestic militarization became the ultimate fig leaf.
A fig leaf to just cover up the underlying rot.
Precisely. They used brute force to mask the fact that the internal machinery of the state simply could no longer turn on its own. And that severely damages a nation's credibility value with its allies.
I mean, if your allies see that you can't even manage your own living room, they definitely aren't going to trust you to guard the Pacific or the Atlantic, right?
Exactly. And we have hard data showing this temperature spike right now. If you look at the 2025 tracking data, you see a historic pivot in how force is applied.
What kind of pivot?
Well, the federal government has been drastically expanding its Title X powers. For those unfamiliar, Title X basically allows the federalization of the National Guard.
Wait, isn't that usually kept in reserve for, massive emergencies like Hurricane Katrina or major earthquakes?
Historically, yes. It was for catastrophic events. But recently, we've seen it normalized for routine public policing, public deterrence, things like that. The Center for American Progress actually published a brilliant insight on this.
Oh, what do they call it?
They coined the term social allergy.
A social allergy. So the system is basically overreacting to something that shouldn't actually be life-threatening.
You hit the nail on the head. In any healthy democratic society, you are going to have friction. Protests, labor disputes, political disagreements, that is just the pollen in the air.
Right, it's totally normal.
It is. A healthy democratic immune system processes that friction through legislation or economic reform or technological innovation. But when the system loses its elasticity, it becomes hyperallergic.
It views normal democratic friction as a mortal threat.
Exactly. And it responds with military force. And the geopolitical cost of this allergic reaction is just staggering. The data actually shows that after the domestic deployments in 2025, international hours trust in America's democratic legitimacy plummeted by 15%.
Wow. 15% is huge. But here is where I have to push back hard on Giglio's premise. Because we were talking about the U.S. innovation immune system failing.
Go for it. Play devil's advocate.
Okay, think about it. We have OpenAI, we have NVIDIA, we have SpaceX literally catching 20-story rockets out of thin air with giant mechanical chopsticks.
They're incredible feats of engineering.
Exactly. And we have the whole CHIPS Act pumping money into semiconductors. On paper, the United States holds the undisputed heavyweight title in AI models, advanced chips, aerospace. We have the absolute best toys on the planet.
That is undeniably true.
So how can you say the system is broken when the tech sector is booming like this? It feels like a paradox.
It is the most common blind spot when looking at American power. You are pointing to incredibly shiny, powerful components, but Giglio's theory demands we look at the ecosystem, not just the individual tech giants.
Okay, so distinguish those for me.
Think of it this way. You could go out and buy the most advanced, top-tier graphics card on the market today. Just a complete beast of a GPU.
Right, the best money can buy.
But if you try to plug that cutting-edge GPU into a motherboard that is still running Windows 95, what happens?
Oh, you get a catastrophic blue screen of death. It crashes immediately because the underlying architecture just can't handle the hardware.
Precisely. You have a systemic failure despite having a world-class component. Let's look at the mechanism behind this. The Reagan Institute and McKinsey released the National Security Innovation Base Report, the NSI report, in 2026.
And what did that show?
It reads like a terminal diagnosis for the American innovation pipeline. They found that less than 1% of all Pentagon contract funding actually makes it into the hands of deep tech and emerging startups.
Wait, less than 1%? Where's the other 99% going?
It is entirely bottlenecked by legacy defense contractors. The mechanism here is just layers of bureaucratic red tape. The procurement cycle requires decades of compliance, lobbying, and clearances.
So a nimble startup doesn't stand a chance.
Not at all. A brilliant AI startup will literally burn through all of its venture capital just waiting for a security clearance. So they die off, or they get bought out, leaving only the slow, outdated giants to feed at the trough.
That is wild.
The NSI report literally labels U.S. talent and manufacturing infrastructure as a catastrophic area of weakness.
Oh, wow. So it's a failure of translation. You have this massive, brilliant brain in Silicon Valley, but the central nervous system and the muscles, like the manufacturing base, the procurement system, they are completely paralyzed.
That translation failure is fatal in a tech race. Because of this bottleneck, the U.S. defense tech deployment cycle is now nearly 30% slower than that of emerging powers.
30% slower. In the tech world, that is an eternity.
It is. When you are 30% slower to deploy, you aren't just losing a contract. You are losing an entire generational leap in warfare and infrastructure. And this brings us right back to the democratic legitimacy we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so
If your tech ecosystem only enriches the 1% in Silicon Valley, while the other 99% feel their livelihoods are threatened by that exact same tech, your system loses its legitimacy.
because it's not serving the people anymore.
Exactly. Innovation stops being the cure and instead becomes the very thing causing the social allergy.
Which perfectly explains the troops on the streets. The government has no technological leverage left to offer the middle class, so it defaults to physical leverage to keep order.
You've got it. That is the domestic reality.
So if that is the domestic reality, we have to zoom out. How does this look on the global chessboard? Because I am picturing the U.S. essentially as a crazy genius right now.
A crazy genius.
Like locked in a lab building those incredible laser weapons, right? But emotionally unstable and completely ignoring the fact that the front porch is currently on fire.
That paints quite the picture.
How are the other strategic players reacting to this? Because they must be taking advantage of this distraction.
They absolutely are. And the difference really boils down to visible deterrence versus invisible expansion. The U.S. is currently relying heavily on visible deterrence. Aircraft carriers, sanctions, troops.
Stuff you can see on the news.
Right. It is loud, it's expensive, and it's brittle. Emerging powers, however, are playing a totally different game. They are focused on invisible expansion.
Like what?
They are rewriting the rules of the 21st century not with guns, but with digital standards, green energy patents, and ironclad supply chain resilience. It acts like water. It just flows around the rock.
That is so strategic. And Europe is caught right in the middle of this, aren't they? Are they finally pulling away from the crazy genius?
The shift is undeniable. The 2026 European Policy Center analysis lays this out starkly. The latest U.S. national defense strategy essentially prioritizes homeland security and countering China, which effectively leaves Europe to fend for itself.
So Europe feels abandoned.
It's an Atlantic retreat, basically. And the European elites see this clearly. Over 60% of them no longer view the U.S. as a reliable defender.
Over 60%. That is a huge majority.
It is. And this realization has supercharged their push for strategic autonomy and what they're calling sovereign AI.
Sovereign AI, meaning they want their own data centers, their own algorithms, completely independent of American tech giants.
Exactly.
Because relying on American servers when the U.S. government is dealing with massive domestic unrest is just too big of a liability for them.
Right. You don't outsource your brain to a neighbor who might not wake up tomorrow. And if Europe is pulling up the drawbridge, you have to look at how adversaries are weaponizing this whole distraction.
Like China.
Yes, look at China. According to the 2026 forecast from Merrick's and Chinese think tanks like CICR, Beijing doesn't view American domestic militarization as a threat.
They don't.
No, they view it as the death rattle of a predatory hegemon.
So they see the sanctions and the tariffs not as strength, but as the U.S. overcompensating for that exact translation failure we talked about earlier.
You nailed it. They see that America can invent the tech, but can't scale or deploy it quickly enough. So China is actively exploiting the divide between the U.S. and Europe.
While the U.S. is paralyzed by internal fighting.
Right. While the U.S. fights over whether green energy is even real, China is aggressively flooding Europe with green tech, solar patents, and EVs. They are essentially saying to Europe, we can provide the invisible infrastructure you need while your old ally is busy policing its own streets.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because we have painted an incredibly grim picture of this failing digital heart. But to keep our critical thinking sharp here on the Sip and Talk session, we have to play devil's advocate.
Let's do it.
Giglio's theory leans incredibly hard into tech determinism.
Yes, it does.
This idea that innovation is the absolute center of gravity for a nation's survival. But is that actually true? Because if you look at a patient whose organs are failing, if there is no social fairness, if people literally can't afford groceries, slapping a brand new high-tech digital heart into that body isn't going to save the patient.
No, it won't.
Is it possible that tech just isn't everything?
That is the most crucial pushback we can offer today, and it's essential for a balanced perspective. Academic circles actually offer two major counterarguments to Giglio's tech-obsessed worldview.
Okay, lay them on me. What is the first one?
The first is institutionalism. Institutionalists argue that the social contract fundamentally matters more than any piece of technology.
Because technology without a social contract is just a tool for disruption.
It's a poison. Imagine Silicon Valley successfully rolls out an AGI that automates millions of administrative and logistics jobs overnight.
Which is very possible soon.
If the government lacks the institutional capability to redistribute the wealth generated by that AI, you get mass structural unemployment. That leads to poverty, which leads to riots, which requires the military to step in.
Wow. In that scenario, the innovation didn't fail. It succeeded brilliantly.
Exactly. But because the social institutions were broken, the innovation itself became the catalyst for collapse.
That is a terrifyingly plausible scenario. The tech works perfectly, but the society just shatters. Okay, what is the second counterargument?
The second is neorealism, which is entirely grounded in the physical world. Neorealists argue that despite all this talk of algorithms and digital ecosystems, the 21st century is still ultimately governed by geography and hard resources.
Oh, right. We get so caught up in the digital cloud that we literally forget about the dirt. The United States still has two massive oceans protecting it.
Oceans, incredibly fertile land, and deep energy reserves. As of 2025, despite all the internal political chaos, regardless of whether it's the Biden administration, Trump, or anyone else, the U.S. remains a top global exporter of crude oil and liquefied natural gas.
That is pure, unadulterated hard power.
It is. You cannot code your way out of a freezing winter if you don't have energy. So neorealists argue that this immense geographic and resource-based shield gives the U.S. a buffer that tech alone simply cannot replace.
So even if the innovation immune system is severely compromised, the physical body of the nation is just incredibly hard to kill. Okay, that definitely grounds the conversation. It reminds us that we can't just worship at the altar of Silicon Valley, but we also can't ignore the rot in the system either. Which brings us to the ultimate question for decision makers.
Right, the practical side.
If we accept that the system is sick, but we have the physical resources to survive, how do we actually cure the disease? If the goal is to get troops off the streets and rebuild trust with both our own citizens and our allies, what does the practical solution actually look like?
The practical solution Giglio proposes is a concept called distributed innovation. And this requires a massive paradigm shift.
What kind of shift?
Well, for the last 30 years, when we thought of innovation, we thought of shiny glass campuses in California or, high-frequency trading algorithms on Wall Street.
Very centralized wealth.
Exactly. But true resilience means permeating technological advancement into the most fundamental blue-collar sectors of society.
So getting the tech out of the cloud and into the mud, what does that actually look like on the ground?
It looks like taking advanced AI and sensor networks and deploying them into the Midwest for precision agriculture, radically increasing crop yields and enriching farmers rather than replacing them.
Oh, I love that, using AI to boost the middle class instead of firing them.
Exactly. And it looks like taking billions of dollars and decentralizing the aging national power grid. By building microgrids powered by local renewable energy, you ensure that no single cyber attack or natural disaster can black out an entire state.
That is real resilience. And I imagine education plays a huge part in this too.
It has to. It looks like totally revamping public education so that the workforce can actually utilize these tools.
It's basically about changing the objective of the tech. Instead of innovation existing solely to maximize next quarter's shareholder value, it returns to serving the social contract.
Precisely. When innovation makes the average person's life more secure, the social allergy goes away.
The inflammation drops.
Exactly, the inflammation drops. And suddenly, you don't need the National Guard to maintain order because the system is organically maintaining itself again.
This has been an absolute masterclass in looking past the headlines, which leaves you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to chew on today.
To hear it.
If national governments continue to suffer from this immune collapse, if they fail to distribute innovation and just rely on brute force, while the tech giants consolidate all the actual digital and infrastructural power, will the superpower of the late 21st century even be a traditional country?
Ooh, that is a heavy thought.
Right. Or are we watching the slow, messy birth of sovereign tech states that command more loyalty and power than the governments that host them?
That is a profound question to end on. And as always, the goal of our conversation today isn't to criticize or discriminate against any specific nation, political party, or group.
Of course not.
We are simply unpacking the objective structural mechanics of the world to help you build your own independent, critical thinking in an era of serious information overload.
Absolutely. If you love having your brain stretched like this, make sure you hit subscribe to Sip and Talk podcast so you never miss a session with us.
It is always a good time.
And look, if all this heavy geopolitical theory has your head spinning, you need to take a breather. Go check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life. He just dropped a brand new travel vlog.
Oh, I saw that one.
The visuals are stunning, and it is exactly the kind of palate cleanser you need after a deep analytical session like this.
It really is. Mickey's videos are fantastic. Highly recommend checking them out.
Drop a comment on his video and tell him Sip and Talk sent you. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Take these new frameworks, look at the world a little differently, and we will catch you next time.